as unfair as possible.
Yeah.
Like, you just go fast and hard, and if they don't have the answer for it, they're just going to lose. And then sometimes they do have the answer for it, but they're not going to be fast enough to kill you, so you have time to combo off again.
Yeah, so I'm with you. If you can do something degenerate, why not just really go
yeah.
all the way? So Braun-Duin, he's going to lead with a Gataxian Probe. He's in the play here. Both players are 5-1, so Ryan Ori playing Sneak and Show. He's going to reveal a hand of Show and Tell and Sneak Attack, along with a Brainstorm and a Spell Pierce. There's a little bit of disruption there, but he does not have a fatty that he can put into play off of either Sneak and Show, or Show and Tell and Sneak Attack.
He also doesn't look like he has a Force of Will, and that Spell Pierce is really his only protection to stop an early Storm hand from Brian. So if Brian happens to have like a Duress or a Cabal Therapy, he very easily could go off on turn 2, because it looks like he has some Rituals and Infernal Tutor already in his hand.
Yeah, it looks like he has, yeah, like you said, he has the Infernal Tutor. He also has a Lotus Petal and a Brainstorm as well. So yeah, Gataxian Probe, one of those cards that it's so innocuous, it doesn't seem very powerful, but in Legacy, getting that information is just huge.
Yeah, the information is huge. The fact that it draws a card is fine, but after playing the Sneak and Show deck with Brian, you know, for those consecutive tournaments when he did very well in the Invitational with it, you know, we realized that Probe was just a must for that type of deck. And honestly, there's a lot of times where even if it didn't draw a card, I would want to play it.
So Ryan Ori, he did draw a Force of Will for the turn, so that's one of the frustrating things when you're an Ant player. You kind of see their hand, you see they don't have it, but they get a draw step. So
yeah.
But interesting though, Ryan decided not to play the Lotus Petal, so he actually can't cast Brainstorm and Spell Pierce this turn. So interesting to see if Ryan decides if that might cost Ryan here.
Yeah, I'm not sure why he wants to hold on to the Petal here. I like having as many options as possible, especially when you're playing against a deck that can just kill you out of nowhere. So you want to have, you know, all of the different possibilities.
Oh wow! So Brian cast Ritual, but he has the Duress for the Force of Will. And yeah, you're right. I think he's going to go for it this turn. He has Ritual. It looks like it might be a Cabal Ritual as well after that. So.
Okay. So now here, if Ryan had that Lotus Petal in play, he could potentially use that that Brainstorm to try and find another Force of Will in a blue card.
Exactly. Yeah. There's really no reason to hold on to that Lotus Petal in this situation. I can't imagine what you're playing around here. Maybe you want to kind of incentivize Brian to go for it, but at the same time, he already knows you have the Lotus Petal, and you're kind of exposing yourself to obviously a Duress or a Thoughtseize.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would much rather just deter Brian from going for
it.
I would want him to think I drew another Spell Pierce.
Exactly, yeah. So let's see if that...
yeah, it looks like he's going to be able to empty his hand naturally.
Yeah, and he knows exactly. Yeah, he knows he doesn't have to worry about anything from Ori. Ori already used the Spell Pierce. He has no mana available, and the Force of Will is already gone. So
he doesn't have any way to generate red mana here, so he's not going to be able to go and do Passing Flames. So this looks like it's just going to be an Ad Nauseam.
Well, he's got 5. Yeah, he's able to generate 5 because he does have Threshold. So I believe he had 3 black mana, used 1 for Duress, then he had 4 off the second Ritual, and then he used 2 for the, so it's 7. Yeah, so he can get an Ad Nauseam here. And I don't believe he played a land for the turn either.
He has not played a land, but he's not going to have any mana floating. So hopefully we're going to see some interesting stuff here with this Ad Nauseam. I know earlier in the tournament, when Brian lost round 1, he actually cast Ad Nauseam on 19 with 4 mana floating and died.
It happens, yeah, definitely. The worst is when you hit Ad Nauseam, a second Ad Nauseam with your as the first card. Then you're basically like, oh, well, now I'm starting at -5.
He doesn't have the second Ad Nauseam, but he does have Passing Flames and Tendrils.
Yeah.
And early on in the tournament when it happened, he hit all 4 Tutors, 2 Cabal Rituals, Passing Flame Tendrils, just killed him.
So not a bad start. He gets the Lion's Eye Diamond. He does get a land, and there's a Brainstorm. He needs some Ritual effects. There's a second Lion's Eye. So
really, at this point, we're looking for a Ritual and an Infernal Tutor.
Yeah. Lotus Petal. There's a Lotus Petal.
So an Infernal Tutor. There's the Ritual.
There's a second Ritual. So yeah, basically Infernal Tutor here should do it. He's pinging away at his life total. There's another land. Another 2 damage. Oh, there it is. So Infernal Tutor.
From here, it's just elementary.
Yeah, he can get the Passing Flames. He'll have plenty of mana with double Lion's Eye Diamond.
He's already at 9 Storm, so he doesn't even have to Passing Flames.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Get the Tendrils.
Yeah, so Ryan. You know, I'm not sure there's anything really Ryan could have done. Brian did have the Duress, so it probably wouldn't have mattered. if he played the Lotus Petal. But then again, like you said, he could have sacked the Lotus Petal to kind of cast Brainstorm and try to find his second Force of Will.
Yeah, because if the Brainstorm hits Force of Will blue card, then he gets to force the duress and then protect himself from the first ritual that Brian tries to cast.
So here Brian's going to generate infinite mana here.
Yep,
Cast.
Just going through the motions.
I don't even think he has to sack the lines.
Well, he has
he has to sack it to get help.
To empty his hand. He's probably going to cast a duress here just because he wants to make sure he doesn't forget anything. But I imagine he wrote his hand down. Yeah, he's not even going to worry about it.
So pretty impressive here. Turn 2 killed by Braun-Duin with a duress backup. So, and there's the Tendrils. So Tendrils is more than lethal, and Braun-Duin wins on turn 2, game 1. So very impressive start there for Brian. But you know, game 1, you kind of figure that it's probably pretty decent for Brian. He's basically the faster of the 2 combo decks. As long as he can dodge a Force of Will or take care of it, he's probably in pretty good shape. After board, though, this is really where things get interesting.
Absolutely. So Ryan does have the 4 Leyline of Sanctity, which will shut off Tendrils from being able to target him, as well as stops all of the targeted discards. So mulliganing aggressively to a Leyline is going to be something we can expect to see Ryan do here post-board. I imagine he's also going to bring in the Swan Song since they counter all the relevant spells out of the Storm deck, and you know, giving them a 2/2 isn't really that relevant.
Yeah, probably not that big a deal.
You're just stopping them from killing you before you make them sack all their permanents with Emrakul. And then we also have, yeah, it doesn't look like there's anything else that he's going to want in his deck, so I imagine he's just going to bring in the Ley Lines and the Swan Songs.
Yeah, Blood Moon's probably really not important, right?
Definitely. As far as for what BBD is going to do, he obviously is going to bring in the 2 Karakas so that he has an answer to the legendary creatures out of the Sneak and Show deck. And he has to bring in his Chain of Vapor as an answer to Leyline of Sanctity. But other than that, it's definitely going to be up in the air whether or not he's going to go with the Dark Confidant plan. So
yeah, and that is one interesting thing in Brian's sideboard. He has 4 copies of Dark Confidant and 2 copies of Tendrils of Agony, and he was talking about how that's sort of like a transformational sideboard against decks that have a lot of permission spells.
Absolutely, just a bunch of the hate spells. So Brian's been playing this deck off and on for a few opens, and currently all of the sideboard cards that we're expecting to see, there's lots of Spell Pierces, lots of Flusterstorms and cards like that. So bringing in the Dark Confidants and the extra copies of Tendrils, you're not as reliant on going all in with like your LEDs and Infernal Tutors to try and combo them out, where you just like lose to a Flusterstorm. Nobody's going to have removal for you post-board anyways, so Dark Confidant is going to chip in damage, fill your hand, and you can just naturally cast your rituals and then cast the Tendrils. And if they counter it, you just do it again because you have 3 Tendrils in your deck.
Yeah, Dark Confidant's one of those cards that's been in the sideboard of combo decks for a while. It's a really good way to sort of keep gaining incremental advantage against control decks and overwhelm them with spells. So I definitely like that strategy. But you mentioned Leyline of Sanctity. That card is really, really a beating for Storm deck because basically it gives you Shroud, so you can't be targeted by any effect. So you can't actually use your Tendrils of Agony, which is your primary win condition. I mean, I've seen some Storm decks play Empty the Warrens, but Brian doesn't actually have that card, and he doesn't have access to the card at all.
No, that's one of the cards he decided to cut this morning when he was building his sideboard, because he just wanted to be all in on the Dark Confidant plan. So I honestly think he's going to bring in the Bobs, and I could see the games, coming down to, Ryan's going to mulligan aggressively to Leyline, which is going to greatly slow down his deck in general, and then there's a good chance that we could just see 10 attacks from Dark Confidant.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Show and Tell is that it's a blue-red deck. It actually can't cast Leyline of Sanctity, so if it's not in the opening hand, he can't put it into play. But he does have Show and Tell, so that is another way for him to actually get a Leyline to play if he draws it later in the game. So. Yeah, definitely, I agree with you. I think Ryan kind of has to be a little aggressive with his mulligans to try to get that Leyline, just given how not only great it is against Brian's deck, but there are certain hands that you just can't keep against a deck like Storm. Like, for instance, if you can go, if you have a hand of like Show and Tell, Emrakul, Lotus Petal, Land, Ponder, that might not even be good enough against like Show and Tell because that's a turn 3 kill, but Brian can kill you on turn 2. So it's kind of it's a really rough spot for Show and Tell because you have to be a little aggressive with your mulligans, I think.
Absolutely.
So both players here are going to present here and see if they're happy with their opening 7 cards. Like we said, Ryan is probably going to have to be a little bit more aggressive with his mulliganing than Brian, because basically I would say all the pressure is on the Sneak and Show player.
Yeah, because in this type of matchup, you have to figure out what your role is. And being as they're both combo decks, whoever is the slowest combo deck is the one that's going to be on the back foot. Looks like he does have Leyline, and
looks like multiple Swan Songs in his hand as well. So is that actually game? Because Swan Song just counters the Chain of Vapor, right?
Swan Song does counter the Chain of Vapor, but it does not counter the Dark Confidant that's in his hand.
So I've seen Brian pull out some crazier matches. So I would not be surprised if the Dark Confidant just swung for 10 turns.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Let's see if that Dark Confidant plan pays off for BBD.
Well, it does look like Ryan has a City of Traders and a Sneak Attack in his hand, so he's only 1 mana away from actually getting that into play. And then once it's in play, he's just on an expedition to find a monster.
And the great thing about Leyline of Sanctity is not only does it shut down the Tendrils part of Brian's win condition, but it also means that Brian can't use his Duresses and his Thought Seizes to kind of go after Ryan's hand.
Which is huge, because it's not playing the counter spells. That's the only form of interaction that he has.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons Sneak and Show players love having Leyline and Sanctity on their sideboard, because it's not only a great sideboard card against Storm, it's also a great sideboard card against decks like Jund that play Hymn to Turok and a lot of discard spells.
Okay. So it looks like Brian kept a hand without a land, but with the Petal so that he could ponder. If he had drawn a land for his first draw step, then he would have been able to play that Dark Confidant.
Yeah, so it looks like he has Dark Confidant. It looks like he has a Preordain as well, along with a couple of Rituals and that Dark Confidant that you mentioned. So he's going to find a Underground Sea here, and probably going to see a Ponder here. But he also has a Duress, but he can't basically use it now.
Yeah, it's just basically dead in his hand. Now, it's also interesting to note that Ryan has Sneak Attack here, is what his plan's going to be, as opposed to Show and Tell. Sneak Attack actually allows you to attack through Caracas. So they might be able to bounce the Emrakul to your hand when you go into your combat step, but then you can just put it back into play and then actually declare it as an attacker. If they wait for you to attack with it and then bounce it so they don't take any damage, you still get the Annihilator trigger.
Yeah, and that's an interaction we actually saw in the feature match last round, and it's one of the reasons that Sneak and Show is such a difficult deck to beat, because they have so many ways they can beat you. They can beat you with the Show early Show and Tell. They can also beat you with the Sneak Attack, and then after board they can also beat you with Through the Breach. So it's like basically 3 different angles, and they're all kind of difficult to attack for different decks. So. But Ryan just has a City of Traders, so it looks like he's a little land light here, and BBD is looking for a second land here, it looks like.
Yeah, he found it with the Ponder.
And he has it looks like there was a second Dark Confidant on top, but it's going to get shuffled away, unfortunately.
Yeah, I imagine he's probably just going to cast another dig spell here, trying to find his Leyline, or his Chain of Vapor, so that he can bounce the Leyline and then duress it. But unfortunately, there are multiple Swan Songs.
Yeah, the good news for Brian, though, is Ryan is land light. He only has 1 blue mana right now, and he played a city, which means that he probably doesn't have another land in his hand. And if he does play a land, that City of Traders will go away. It will allow him to cast the Sneak and Show that turn.
The Sneak Attack.
The Sneak Attack, rather. So.
And as long as the next land that he draws isn't a red source, Caracas is still live to try and keep him off from being attacked by an Emrakul.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it's an island, or even an Ancient Tomb, Caracas can still be live for Brian.
So he put both on the bottom with the Preordain and drew another non-land, non-Chain of Vapor card.
And right on cue, Ryan did draw a land, but it is an island, so it is not another red source. So like you said, a Caracas is still a live draw here for Brian.
It also looks like that Ryan does have another Leyline in his hand, which probably isn't going to end up being relevant. But if we get to a point where Brian is able to bounce the Leyline and then get rid of it with a Duress, then we still have to worry about Show and Telling another one.
Yep. So Ryan is tapped out for the turn, so he can actually use Swan Song.
And there's the Caracas.
There it is. Why wouldn't it be there? So just in time, the turning. Although I don't know if Ryan actually has a fatty in his hand.
He does not have a monster. It looks like it's he has 2 Swan Songs, a Leyline, and another card.
So actually not that bad situation for Brian. Brian can actually play the Caracas, give himself a little bit of protection. He obviously doesn't know that Ryan doesn't have the fatty, so I don't think he can play the Caracas and tap it for Dark Confidant.
Yeah, I think he has to wait until next turn.
Yeah, but next turn he can get that Confidant to play. He can also cast Ritual and just get both
Next turn he can just
Confidants.
Ritual both Confidants into play.
Why not, right? You need to kind of be a little aggressive here.
The Rituals aren't doing anything else.
Yeah, it also gets him. Also, getting both confidence to play means that he can draw into Chain of Vapor even faster.
Now, it looks like, was that a Gristlebrand?
Yeah, it looks like he might have finally drawn a fatty, but again, with only one red source, Caracas is going to be able to.
That is correct, but if it's a Gristlebrand, he just gets to draw 7 more cards.
Yeah, that's true.
Wherever there is a Gristlebrand, there is usually an Emrakul waiting afterwards.
And so, yeah, he's likely going to find another red source in these top 7.
Well, he even gets to look at like 14
Yeah,
cards
yeah,
to find
there's
a
no reason
red
not
source
to.
Emrakul.
So let's see here. Is BBD going to get another turn?
Didn't look like there was a land.
Yeah, was there no land there?
Just a bunch of blue cards.
Oh, no, I think
just
at the end.
a white bordered card at the
It
end.
might have been a volcanic island.
Yep. Oh, no other monster though. So the Gristlebrand isn't going to get in. So yeah, but he does have another. Oh, the other red source only matters if it's an Emrakul. So if Brian is able to get some Bobs in play, and Ryan happens to miss on an Emrakul, in like the top 20 cards in his deck, then he might have a shot.
Yeah, you'd have to imagine he's probably going to dig for another 7 here.
I definitely would. I don't know if I would have brainstormed, though. I would have probably just drawn 7 and then brainstormed afterwards. Because this is actually making the effective 7 only 5 that he's going to look at.
Yeah, you're right.
Because he didn't have a fetch in his hand.
So look, yeah, he's going to put 2 cards back, and he doesn't have a fetch, like you said. So yeah, he has a basic mountain. He can play that this turn. And now, yeah, you just go for the Emrakul here. You got to get rid of those permanents.
Yeah. Yes, like I definitely would have just drawn 7 before I brainstormed. Because now I only get to see 5 fresh cards instead of 10 cards.
Yeah.
Actually, you would have saw 10.
So let's see, does he find the Emrakul here? And the real question is, if he plays him out and he goes into his attack step, what does Brian do? Does he activate Caracas?
If there's an Emrakul?
Well, let's say he just doesn't.
So it looks like he didn't find an Emrakul.
Oh wow, so yeah, no Emrakul there.
So he'll go into his attack step.
Yep.
Ryan's just going to bounce it.
And then Ryan's at 5, and
so he'll be able to cast his brainstorms and ponders that are in his hand, but just looking at the cards as he goes through it, it looks like just a bunch of counter spells and lands.
yeah, he has that Grizzlebrand, but nothing.
Although he will be able to do some force of will actions here on these Dark Confidants.
Yeah, so we'll see what happes here. Brian's
he's
probably going to
discarding
lead.
the force.
Oh yeah, it looks like he is discarding. No, he's keeping that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it looks like he's keeping a land too. So land, although I gotta say, giving him 2/2s is no longer that that
true.
irrelevant. Being at 5 here, so yeah, it looks like he's gonna discard that second land along with the show and tell.
Yep. Bunch of lands.
Yeah, so it's not that bad for Brian just yet. Imagine he's gonna lead with a Cabal Ritual.
Although it does look like he only has 1 Dark Confidant in his hand,
Oh, okay.
which that Force of Will is going to take care of.
Yeah, you have to imagine he has to force it here, right?
Yeah, you just can't even think about letting it resolve.
So does he have another card draw
Although
spell?
to be fair, Brian can't really attack with that Dark Confidant because he could just put Gristlebrand into play and block.
That's true. Yeah. Maybe Ryan just doesn't want Brian to dig for cards here.
Yeah.
So Ryan's at 4 life. He just needs to draw an Emrakul. He drew a land for the turn. He's got Spell Pierce, Swan Song, and Grizzlebrand
and
in
some
his hand.
lands.
So, not the worst situation here for Brian. That Caracas is doing some heavy lifting. So Ryan, with no real play here, just has to pass the turn back and just draws a Lion's Eye Diamond. Yeah, a lot of duresses and rituals, but really nothing else to do here.
Yeah. Now, I've always questioned the Chain of Vapor as the bounce card in the Tendrils decks. Like, you have to chain and then flash it back with Past in Flames if they open on double A line. So there's times where I think that Echoing Truth would just be better.
Yeah.
And then there's situations like this where if it were wipe away, then he would just, like, you wouldn't even be able to counterspell it.
Yeah. wipe away is huge. And that's the thing. It's like with just one Chain of Vapor, if they have the counterspell, that's pretty huge. The same token, just having access to Empty the Warrens is huge. So
Yeah.
I kind of feel like not only do you need a bounce spell, but you also need the Empty the Warrens.
Yeah, like an Empty the Warrens in his deck at this point would make this game much different.
So Brian draws a Brainstorm, so he's going to be able to dig a little bit more for some action, but it looks like Ryan's going to try to counter it here.
He might try and use some Spell Pierces.
Yeah, I don't think he could use the Swan Song because, like you said, he could put the Grizzlebrand into play as a blocker.
That's
so
true.
I don't think Brian can actually attack. But then again, so I don't think Brian can attack.
Yeah, because then he would gain the 7 life, be able to draw 7 cards before the Grizzlebrand died.
Exactly.
There's Ad Nauseam. And Past in Flames.
So Duress probably, at least one of Duress probably goes back to his top of his library.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if he's going to try and get an Ad Nauseam to resolve.
Yeah, you think? I mean, he's got to. If he probably
has
wants
to
to
try
play
and
around
do
Spell
something.
Pierce. Yeah, I don't know if he has to do it this turn.
Yeah, not this.
But yeah, I'm with you. He's got to try to do something. If he can get a Chain of Vapor, obviously we know it's not going to resolve, but it doesn't really matter. Also, even getting another Dark Confidant. I mean, just getting something. There might be an opportunity if Ryan gets a little too aggressive.
Looks like he's going to go for it here.
Yeah, he did draw the pass. I know he has the passing points.
I wonder if if this Cabal Ritual resolves, if he just casts Ad Nauseam without using the other Cabal Ritual, just to save it for using, because you can flashback Ad Nauseam with Past in Flames at a later time if you need to.
That's true. So it looks like Ryan drew a Show and Tell. Yep, still nothing for Ryan, still no Emrakul, and still no card manipulation. But there's a preordain for Brian. Just another Cabal Ritual, so he can probably scribe both those, although he could keep the land.
I think he's going to keep the land. Because at this point, his plan is to hope that Ryan doesn't draw into a Grizzlebrand, and at some point piece something together with Past in Flames and Ad Nauseam. Because he does have that LED in hand.
Yeah, he's got LED, he's got plenty of rituals. Actually, no, it looks like he only has one. Yeah, it looks like that's just a ritual there.
So there's another Spell Pierce.
Man, I think if BBD just waits a turn, maybe he's just really afraid of Ryan drawing an Emrakul.
That one was shiny. And it's the Emrakul.
And there it is.
He's going to do that one first. I wonder if he has another Volcanic Island in his deck.
Yeah, so he's going to make him do it.
Oh, I guess he just wants to draw the cards. So does Ryan just not have another Volcanic Island in his deck? Otherwise, he could have just fetched for another Volcanic.
No, well, he has 3 Volcanic Islands in his deck.
I don't remember if he discarded one. Maybe he discarded one with the big clump of cards earlier.
Yeah, it's possible he discarded one. Yeah, so yeah, I think he might have discarded one of the Volcanic Islands, so he actually couldn't go for it that turn.
I see.
Although if he didn't put the Grizzlebrand in play, he could have gone for it, right?
Yeah, he could have got in with the Emrakul and just Brian would have lost all of his permanents.
Yeah. And given
then
the fact
everything
that his hand,
shuffles back in.
Yeah. Yeah, and given the fact that Ryan does have like that Swan Song in his hand still, he probably was okay to just go with the Emrakul plan. But either way, he's drawing 7 cards. Looks like he still has a Grizzlebrand and Emrakul in his hand.
So we were able to see how one sideboard card like Leon of Sanctity was just completely able to lock Brian out of this game.
Yeah, and this is the second match in a row where I've seen Storm just fold to 1 card. I mean, the first time it was Force of Will, which is a little more reasonable, but this card, Leyline of Sanctity, is just such a nightmare to kind of contend with, especially when your opponent also has counterspells. You know, it's just such a difficult card to deal with.
I don't think Ryan realizes that he can put that Emrakul back into play after it's bounced and still get to attack with it.
Yeah, at this point, I have to wonder why Ryan continues to go down this line. And I'm with you. I think he just doesn't realize that he can respond within his attack step, just put down another Emrakul.
It's drawn another 7 cards.
Which
So-
still isn't the worst thing.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing, but he's having to discard so many cards because of the lines that he's taking. Like, Brian is able to see a significantly larger portion of his deck, and
Yeah.
that's some idea of what else he's boarding in besides the ley lines.
So he's giving a lot of information away as to what's in his deck after board.
I imagine there's at least 2 Swan Songs in the graveyard right now, so
Yeah.
Brian knows that he has at least 2 Swan Songs.
Yeah.
And if he discards the 3rd one here with his discard, then that's some pretty big information.
Yeah, I'm with you. Given this line, it kind of doesn't make much sense. And I'm not sure he drew another Grizzlebrand.
So the 3rd Volcanic Island actually was in his deck, so he would have been able to kill him that turn.
Yeah, so at this point, then it's clear he doesn't.
Yeah,
he's
he
not
just
aware of
doesn't-
the
just doesn't
interaction.
realize.
So he's looking through his deck here.
Which is one of the unique things that I find playing this Legacy format is there are so many interactions like that that people just aren't aware of. Earlier in the tournament, I was watching an Affinity player play against an Esper Deathblade deck, and the gentleman playing Deathblade wasn't aware that you could target Edge Champion with Umezawa's Jit, because it's not a colored permanent.
Yeah.
And Edge Champion is only protection from colored permanents. People just think, oh, protection from everything.
Yeah.
Same with this, you're like, oh, well, I'm already going into my attack step. I can't activate this again. But you're actually not in your declare attackers. It's still in the attack step.
Yeah, and it's, there's so many tricky interactions in Legacy. I think that's one of the reasons people love this format, because there's so much play involved. Particularly, we were watching Elves on camera. That deck, I cannot imagine playing that deck unless I've played it for years. Like, you really have to know what you're doing with that deck.
I played it in one tournament and didn't do very well. It felt like I played it very poorly because there were just so many interactions. Plus, I played against Storm twice and got turn 1 for basically 4 games in a row. So.
Yeah, well, there are times where you're like, it doesn't matter how good I play, I'm going to lose no matter what. And then there are those times where you're like, you just kick yourself because you know you probably made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things early on in my career, that's one of the, I think, the hardest things for a young player is to kind of realize that it's not so much luck, it's really just you probably made a mistake at some point during the tournament, during the match, and kind of understanding that that's the reason you lost, it's nothing else. So looks like Taxing Probe from Ryan.
So I actually don't like Brian allowing this probe to resolve. I think here I would concede, because now he's giving information to Ryan that he still has Ad Nauseam and Past in Flames in his deck. It's pretty obvious that Ryan isn't aware that he can activate Sneak Attack again to put his Emrakul back into play. But it's fairly elementary that he has multiple monsters here. I don't think if I were BBD, I would make him show me the 2 monsters. I would have just conceded to hide those 2 cards.
Yeah, and we've seen some players on camera, they'll never concede, they'll force their opponents to go through the motions, and that's fine, except when you're giving information away. I'm with you. You never want to give away too much information. Even if it seems like it's not relevant, you never know. It's these small edges that you're constantly giving your opponent when you don't need to. And it's just, you have to think of it that way. It doesn't matter if you think they're irrelevant or they're small. Every edge you give away could add up over the course of an entire tournament. So you really have to be wary of that and make sure that you're not giving up too much information.
Yep. We even saw something as small as not playing the Lotus Petal in game 1 from the Sneak and Show side. It might not have made a difference, but there's a very small chance that he could have brainstormed into Force Blue card and not died.
Yeah, I remember, John Finkel used to talk about it all the time, where it's like, you don't have to be that much better than everyone. It's just about giving up these incremental advantages throughout the course of a tournament that really add up, and that's the reason you lose. It's not so much that, generally, you don't lose tournaments because you make this dramatic blunder and it costs you multiple games. It's usually these small things that add up over time that you might not even notice. So like you said, maybe giving away a little information there for Brian will pay off for Ryan in the next game, or, obviously Ryan not playing the Lotus Petal in the first game, maybe that cost him. We don't really know, but it's all these small things that if you add them up, are really going to hurt you in the end. So I think it's a matter of playing tight and realize what you're giving up and what you're really gaining in return. There's really no reason for Brian to kind of show his hand there. He knows he's losing.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that information linking is like one of the most overlooked of those small percentages that you give up, whether it's not re-sideboarding going into game 3, so your opponent knows exactly the components of your deck, especially in a format like Legacy, where it's not too uncommon to have a transformational type of sideboard.
Yeah.
And sideboard cards are just extremely powerful. Same thing with showing your opponent that you have tokens in your deck box when you're pulling your deck out. Like small information leaks like that, they will start to add up as you continue to play in these big, long 10-minute tournaments.
Yeah, and I think, you need to have a system when you play in these big tournaments, because they're very long, they're exhausting. So one of the things I like to do is you have these routines that allow you to play tight. Like, you need to kind of, sometimes they seem like OCD, but you need these kind of routines each round to make sure that your mind can stay focused and you're doing the correct things. Because like you said, even something like if you have tokens in your box, they know that's a little information you're giving away. And it seems innocuous, but it's not. Like, it adds up over the course of a tournament. And you never know, especially if you're playing against a smart player like BBD, he can catch up, he can pick up on these things, So when you're playing at high-level tournaments and you're playing against good players, you want to make sure you're not giving them anything, because they will pick up on it.
Absolutely. Especially in a format like Legacy. Like, I wrote my entire article, and we see the ley line
There's
yet again.
that ley line.
Oh, man.
And a swan song in his hand as well.
And a sneak attack with a City of Traders. So this looks exactly like last game.
Yeah, but you were saying you wrote an article about Legacy.
Yeah, so my article this week was about turn 1 deck identification in Legacy, based off of what your opponent does. So whether they're like Arid Mesa, Fetch, a Volcanic Island, Cast Ponder, like those are all pieces of information that allow you to try and determine what deck your opponent's playing, so that hey, I have to make sure that I don't die on turn 1 because my opponent's playing Storm, or hey, I know my opponent could possibly be on Miracle, so I have some time to flesh out my game plan. That type of information can be very important, and if your opponent sits down and they look like they have 13 zombie tokens in their deck box, then you kind of have an idea of what they're playing, and you can make your mulligan decisions and your turn 1 play decisions based off of that. And those percentages really add up, especially if it's a seasoned Legacy player.
Yeah, and people, maybe younger players, newer players, they hear these small things and they think they're kind of silly. But, these things matter. Like, I was having a conversation with Pakula on our mailing list, and we were talking about Rug Delver prior to Grand Prix DC, and somebody was like, do you think we should play Scalding Tarns and Flooded Strands and Polluted Deltas as our Sacklands and Rug Delver, as opposed to Misty Rainforest? Yeah, exactly.
What if Foothills?
Because, yeah, you just, there's a possibility that your opponent's going to think you're playing something other than what you're actually playing because of the Sacklands. So it doesn't seem that relevant. But, the type of Sacklands you play in your deck could be relevant because you're giving away information, If I lead with a Polluted Delta, that could be Esper Blade, that could be Reanimator, that could be
any
Ant,
of the bug decks. It could be High Tide, it could be Omnitel.
If I play Wooded Foothills, it's a whole other story. So there's so much information that you're giving away just by your turn 1 play. So like you said, deck identification is huge in a format like Legacy, where so many of their decisions are made in the early turns.
Absolutely. And I really like the Wooded Foothills and Rug Delver. It's never a good feeling to get stifled off of a Wooded Foothills, but it happens fairly often.
It's like, oh, my elf opponent doesn't have an elf on turn 1? Oh, well.
Man, what kind of hand do they keep? Or like, oh, this Jun guy must not have kept a hand with Thoughtseize or Deathrite Shaman. Stifle, Nimble Mongoose, go. Oh, man.
So Brian trying to, just like game 2, he's trying to develop his board around this Leyline of Sanctity. He does have that Dark Confidant. So we'll see if it's going to be able to enter play. It didn't enter play the last time, but Ryan does have Emrakul and Sneak Attack.
Yeah, this definitely is not looking good for Brian. He's going to need to find a Chain of Vapor and hope it resolves. So the best course of action here is, I imagine Ryan's just going to play his Sneak Attack next turn. So if BBD is able to Chain of Vapor the ley line and then just use a flurry of discard spells to try and take care of Ryan's hand, then he'll have a shot here. But other than that Emrakul is going to put some work on him. But it looks like Ryan does have a Caracas in his hand.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because it's basically the same situation as last game. Ryan has the Caracas, and Ryan right now only has access to 1 red source of mana. He has that Scalding Tarn. He can get a Volcanic Island, but he doesn't have a second red source.
Looks like he does have a Gristlebread.
Yeah, it looks like he did draw the Gristlebread, so... Oh, and he has a Show and Tell as well, so he can Show and Tell Sneak Attack.
Oh.
But
Brian is able to put his Caracas into play.
Hello!
Oh, this is so good. Because he could just put a monster in.
Yeah. Let's see here. Is the monster going to come into play, or is it... Well,
it's probably going to be Sneak Attack.
Yeah, the way Show and Tell works, you put the card face down. Yep, and it is going to be Sneak Attack. So Ryan can't be happy with that. But either way, he's going to be able to sacrifice his Scalding
He's able
Tarn
to draw 7 cards
and draw
there.
7. Yeah, so not the worst shape for him.
Although I don't know if I would even do that yet. Like, he doesn't need to draw them now. Like,
Well,
I think that I would just wait, and by not drawing them now, you actually prevent the Dark Confidant from attacking you and taking 2 points away.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, your best bet is to probably just pass here, because with the Caracas in play, there's really you're not going to get any value out of it. Other than just drawing 7, which you can do, like you said, on Brian's turn.
Although, to be fair, Brian would just be able to bounce the before blockers, but then that leaves him
then that
open on
leaves him
Ryan's
open.
turn, so
Yeah.
that's not even a line to consider.
So, yeah, and plus Ryan also has a Swan Song. So, yeah, I agree with you. There's no reason to activate it now. I would just pass.
It looks like that's what Ryan is thinking, too. You realize that he's not going to use it now, so...
The only question here is if he activates it at the end of Brian's turn, he won't be able to attack with it. So he'll be able to draw 7, but if there's not another Grizzlebrand in the top 7 cards, then what do you do there?
Which is true because, as we saw from last game, Ryan isn't aware that he's able to double activate with that,
and that's
with
huge.
that Emrakul.
And this is great here. Brian drew a second Caracas. So you could actually try to bait Ryan into playing it, attack with the Dark Confidant. If Ryan sees an opportunity, he might play the Grizzlebrand, and in response, he bounces it.
Yeah.
He might draw 7, and then Ryan plays the second Caracas. And the new Legend rule allows him to do that. So, yeah, that could be a great turn for Brian. Let's see if he decides to attack with the Dark Confidant.
So it looks like this Chain of Vapor is just eluding BBD.
That one Chain of Vapor.
Yeah, that one Chain of Vapor.
Ryan always has the Leyline, but he does have 4 copies, so.
Now, what's actually very interesting is when BBD and I were playing the Sneak and Show deck around the Indianapolis Invitational, when he top forward, Brad won, and then I top forward the Legacy Open that weekend, Brian and I did not play Leyline in our sideboard because we felt like while it's very good against Storm, that's really the only deck you wanted for besides Jund, and we felt like both of those matches weren't all that bad anyways, so we didn't just want to dedicate 4 slots for just 2 decks. But here we get to see that, when you have it, it is pretty backbreaking.
Yeah, so Brian reveals a land of Dark Confidant, and then he draws a Dark Witch over the turn. So he chose not to attack with Dark Confidant last turn, so I imagine he's probably not going to do the same this turn. Maybe he just doesn't see the play, or he feels it's not worth it.
It's really interesting that Ryan isn't aware of the double activation on the sneak attack, because if that's the case, on Brian's end step, I would put Grizzlebrand into play, draw 7 cards, and then hope to draw into a second red source that I'll be able to attack with an Emrakul the next turn.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those. Yeah, I'm surprised as well because, if you're playing a deck like Sneak and Show, you probably expect them to kind of know all the ins and outs. It's one of those decks that you don't just pick up. Usually you probably played it for a while or you actually have some experience with it. So, and that interaction comes up a lot in this format. I mean, Caracas is heavily played, so. But interesting to see here how Brian can navigate this situation. It's very similar to the last game. He is not finding that Chain of Vapor. And if he actually finds it, he's in a much better shape than he was last time, because last time Ryan had like multiple Swan Songs, Spell Pierce and stuff. Now Brian has plenty of mana and
a Tendrils in his
and a
hand.
Tendrils, yeah. So he could actually win right away if he can just get that Chain of Vapor to resolve.
So there's an Infernal Tutor, which doesn't look like it's really going to be doing much right here.
Oh, wow. It looks like he's ad nauseam as well. So let's see how Brian navigates these next 2 turns. So Ryan's still without a second red source of mana.
Yeah. He did draw another Ancient Tomb, just not going to play it because he'll lose the City of Traders.
And there's a Polluted Delta revealed off Dark Confidant.
I guess if worst comes to worst, Brian might kill himself with Bob before he draws that Chain of Vapor.
Yeah, so Brian's plan might just be to let Dark Confidant deal the work for him, and Leyline of the Void is simply going to be, all right, best Leyline of the Void ever. I really want to see Brian attack with Dark Confidant. I just want to see what Ryan does. Like, if BBD attacks with Dark Confidant, I want to see how Ryan plays it.
That's true.
There we go.
There we go. Now we got some action.
Oh, wrong land. Undo. So he leads with Emrakul.
Wow, this is going to shuffle it away. If he doesn't bounce it.
Yeah, so he's going to bounce
Man.
it.
If BBD had another Dark Confidant, I might have just shuffled it away.
And there's the second Caracas.
Well, that play is nice and tricky. He can only do it once.
Yeah. There's not a third Caracas in his deck, so that's the only 2 points of damage he's going to be able to get through this game with Dark Confidant, probably.
And there's a Force of Will.
So wow, now his hand is double Emrakul, Grizzlebrand, Force of Will, and Swan Song. So Preordain here will allow Brian to gain a little more velocity with his deck, trying to dig for something. Ooh, there's a Pass and Flame, so that's something that he needs in case the Chain of Vapor does get countered. Like, he might keep both these cards here.
Yeah, he does have a fetch, so the Brainstorm is just like an actual draw 3. If that's the case, I probably would have kept the Brainstorm so that I could Brainstorm this turn.
Yeah, you can Brainstorm this turn.
And then draw into the Pass and Flames and then shuffle away the Chaff.
So Brian's hand in this situation, if he just draws the Chain of Vapor, I think he wins. Because Ryan's hand basically can only counter one spell. So if he's able to get that Pass and Flames to resolve after the Chain of Vapor is countered, he should be fine.
I have a feeling that he's going to try and Ad Nauseam here and bait a counterspell out of Ryan's hand. Which, if that's his plan, that's why he left the Brainstorm on top instead of the Pass and Flames. Yep. You don't want to dome yourself for 4.
So yeah, and I think Ryan has to be really concerned here because he doesn't want to counter the wrong spell. I mean, obviously he kind of thinks that Chain of Vapor is probably the card I have to concern myself with. Maybe Echoing Truth. Obviously, if it's wipe away, I'm dead no matter what.
Which is one of the unique things when talking with Brian last week when he played this deck, 2 weeks ago in Baltimore, was that there were a lot of games that he won just because his opponents were countering the wrong spell or, just not countering. I think it's more not countering the right spell as opposed to countering the wrong spell. Because most of the time you get to a point to where the counter spells just don't matter because you didn't counter the correct spell.
Well, that's the really cool thing about Storm, as when you're a Storm player, it feels like your opponents are scared of you. Like, it's a really scary deck to play against. Wow, so Brian leads with the Pass and Flames. So he has no mana left in his mana pool. Is he baiting a counterspell here, do you think?
I think he is. Worst case scenario, or best case scenario, it doesn't get countered and he gets to cast some more cantrips. Best case scenario, it does get countered and it just baits a counterspell out of Ryan's hand.
So he has an island here. He's going to cast Brainstorm. That's the first cantrip. A Duress, Ponder, and a Lotus Petal.
None of those are Chain of Vapor. And I'm not sure I like casting the Brainstorm first.
Yeah, Ponder's probably a better card to lead with.
Ponder or Preordain. Looks like he's going to get rid of the Ad Nauseam.
At 12 life, does he think it's just too risky to cast Ad Nauseam? I mean, you can control it, so...
Yeah, well, I imagine I don't think he would bring in the extra tendrils because of ley lines, but...
So Brian's going to play the Lotus Petal, and I think he's probably done for the turn since he already played a land.
He might use the Petal, though, to flash back a Ponder in his graveyard.
Oh, that's right. He still has... Yeah, Pass the Flames is still resolved, so he can still flash back cards in his graveyard. Yeah, so by leading with Brainstorm, he's effectively seeing 2 cards less, deeper. Looks like Brian is debating, contemplating. Yep, and it looks like you're right. He's going to sacrifice Lotus Petal for a blue, and he's going to flash back. It looks like Ponder or... No, Preordain. Doesn't want either of those cards. Scries them both to the bottom, and he draws for the turn, and it's another Brainstorm.
After seeing these last 2 games, an Empty the Warrens would just be fabulous.
Yeah. I expect Brian to probably add Empty the Warrens back to his deck. Now, here's the thing. If Brian realizes how Sneak Attack works with Caracas, then suddenly Brian's just dead. But Ryan would have had to suddenly had an epiphany.
Yeah, just...
Brian basically played this entire game
A stroke
knowing
of
that
genius,
Ryan didn't
per
know
se.
how to, yeah. Ryan must have had like a stroke of genius because he sacked it right away.
Well, he does have.
Oh, he has the yeah.
He has both monsters, so he's going to get in with something regardless.
Yeah, so he's going to go for the
Yeah,
both
we're just-
monsters.
It's the same old song and dance.
Same old, same old.
Gain some life, draw some cards.
And the good thing for Brian is he already played a land for the turn, so he's only going to have one blue unless he draws a Lotus Petal. But he's going to have probably access to 2 counter spells.
Yeah, so for BBD, this is just basically hit. Oh, he brought in Blood Moon?
Yeah, you're right. He brought in Blood Moon, which is kind of a beating here.
Yeah.
In this particular board state. Turns off Caracas. There's another
There's got a
force.
bunch of forces. Yeah.
So is Ryan at 7? It looks like so. Yeah, so it looks like Ryan's at 7. He was at 14, I believe. Then he gained 7 from
Yeah,
Grizzle
then
Brand,
drew
going up to
14.
21. Now he's spent 14 to draw 14 cards.
And drawn 14 cards is pretty good.
Pretty good. Can't complain. So he ponders, finds 3 cards that he doesn't care about. He's going to shuffle his library again.
Yeah. Even if BBD were to happen to draw into this Chain of Vapor here, there's not much.
Yeah, Ryan just has too many counter spells now. Even though he's tapped out of mana, he does have access to double Force of Will. So
Now,
Brian just can't, even with the Passive Flames in his graveyard, he just can't do anything now.
it is good to know that Brian can't die from his Dark Confidant here because the Ad Nauseam is on the bottom of his deck.
Yeah.
So there are small victories.
I will say though, I think if Brian didn't cast the Passive Flames last turn, then a Chain of Vapor is still an out for him because he can cast Chain of Vapor, that gets countered, cast Passive Flame, that gets countered, then rebuy Passive or flashback
Yeah,
Passive Flames.
flashback to Passive Flames.
And he has more than enough mana to do that. So, but again, he still needs to find the Chain of Vapors, and he cast a lot of cantrips last turn and still didn't find it. So the odds are he probably wouldn't have found this game regardless. Looks like he's discarding a Blood Moon. Not sure if he still has another one in his hand. It doesn't really matter. Brian's at 5, so the same play that Ryan's been making this entire time will work for him next
Kill
turn.
him, yeah. We do get to Brainstorm and Ponder.
Yep, and with such a narrow way to kind of deal with Leyline of the Sanctity, this is probably something that Brian feared when he ended up cutting that tendrils, the Empty the Warrens. He probably said, well, there are probably some situations where I won't be able to win. One of them, but basically I'm probably going to be able to see enough cards that I'll eventually see Chain of Vapors. Well, nope, that's not the case. Brian did go through a lot of cards.
Yeah.
But in fairness, if Brian actually knew how the sneak attack worked with Caracas, Brian probably would have never seen this many cards anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered.
Absolutely. Plus, the majority of the hate that you're running into right now is like Spell Pierce, Flusterstorm, Force of Will, Ethersworn Canonist, Meddling Mage. Like,
Yeah.
Leyline of Sanctity is just pretty much strictly for like the combo mirrors like Sneak and Show.
So Brian here is going to attack for 2, drop Ryan to 5, but he really doesn't have any outs here. He doesn't even have the Chain of Vapors to kind of force the action.
Does have a Brainstorm. I think he's going to try and bait some counter spells here.
All right, so yep. Unfortunate here because I was really hoping Brian would pull this one out. It'd have been such an awesome story if he'd be like, yeah, my opponent wasn't aware of the Caracas sneak attack, how that worked. So I was able to pull it out after a really long scenario.
Now, depending on how upset Brian is from losing this, I wonder if he's actually going to talk with Ryan about it after the game, saying, by the way, should have been dead 100 turns prior in both of these 2 games.
Well, that's one of the things where it's like when you lose to someone and they made a mistake against you, you kind of want to needle them about it. But really, in reality, you really shouldn't say anything because it's not your job to kind of help them get better. You know, this could come up again in the next tournament, you know?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where you never know what the right thing to do is. You kind of want to you should probably just keep your mouth shut
Yeah.
so that, they can continue to make those mistakes. It's like when you're at a poker table with someone and they beat you in a hand, you want to rail about how badly they played, but in reality, you should allow them to continue to play that badly,
Definitely.
Not that Ryan played badly this match, but, again, he might not be aware of that interaction, which probably now, if any of his friends at home are watching, they're definitely going to call him up on his cell phone and be like, Ryan, what are you doing? You realize how this works?
He might have a couple text messages.
Yeah, so, there's 2 rounds left. That play might certainly come up again. So hopefully some of his friends at home will let him know, and maybe it'll help him out in the next few rounds, because he's sitting at 5-1. He'll probably move to 6-1, and he's still in pretty good shape to make top 8.
Now, he did just use a Force of Will on an Infernal Tutor, which is interesting.
Yeah, so Brian here still, I guess, yeah, if Brian can bait another Force of Will, he could actually get the Infernal Tutor to find Chain of Vapor.
Yeah, because he does have another Infernal Tutor.
Wow, so suddenly this game got really interesting.
But now he does have Past in Flames still in his graveyard.
Yeah, so he can actually flash back. Oh, he can actually try to flash back Past in Flames here. Wow, so because Brian used that Force of Will, suddenly things have gotten really interesting. Brian can actually force the issue.
There's the Chain of Vapor.
Wow, and there's the Chain of Vapor. Oh my God.
Wow.
So Brian actually was able to do it. He forced Ryan to use a Force of Will early that he didn't need to, based on, oh wow.
So now here he can chain, making him use another Force of Will, and then flash back, use his LEDs and flash back his Past in Flames to chain again, use a bunch of discard to get rid of all the monsters in his hand, and then just try and kill him with Bob in 2 turns.
Yeah. Oh, no, but he has Infernal Tutor in his graveyard, so he could actually just find the Tendrils, right? All he has to do is bounce the ley line.
That's correct.
Find Tendrils, cast Tendrils. So obviously Ryan has to probably cast. So let's see here. Yeah, because Brian does have a duress in his hand, so he has to counter the chain. So this is turn 0. So Ryan is left with no more counter spells in his hand. So now, like you said, he can activate the LED.
Yeah, he just LEDs, flashback, Past in Flames, Chain of Vapor.
Oh, and even he still has the Caracas too. He can tap that for mana, so he can cast Infernal Tutor in response, activate those 3 Lion's Eye Diamonds.
Yeah, which is
and
what
that's
it
exactly
looks
what
like.
he's gonna do.
Well, he had a bunch of mana.
Oh, so he had a bunch of mana floating. Yeah, so here we go. Looks like Braun-Duin is being able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
He just forced the naked Infernal Tutor.
Yeah, that
like
naked Infernal
Tutor. He
Tutor.
didn't even retain priority.
Ryan wasn't really sure about what he should counter there, and Infernal Tutor seemed like a reasonable counter.
See, exactly
you
the
don't
same
know
thing.
what is in his hand.
Just counter the wrong spell.
Yeah, it's all about counter. Yeah, like you said earlier, people just don't know what spell to counter. And it looks like Brian's actually going to be able to pull this match out. He's sacking 3 LEDs in response to the Infernal Tutor, so his hand's going to get discarded. So Infernal Tutor has Hellbent, so he's going to be able to search for any card in his deck, which is likely going to be the Tendrils. So he can search for the Tendrils. Now he can actually use 4 of the mana to flash back.
He just has like a million rituals in his graveyard.
Yeah.
After he flashes back to Past in Flames.
He could even cast so he's going to cast Chain of Vapor first. He has to cast Chain of Vapor first. So wow, unbelievable turn of events here. Basically the turn right before he was going to lose. So Brian's going to find that Tendrils of Agony.
A turn that shouldn't even exist.
Yeah, it should. Yeah, mind you, a turn that shouldn't even exist. Had Ryan understood how the Caracas interaction with Sneak Attack worked with Emrakul, Brian would have lost a turn millions of turns ago. And wisely enough, Brian kind of sensed that Ryan didn't realize how that interaction worked, so he kept playing. He kept playing for his outs.
Which I also imagine is what made him try and bait those counter spells, thinking, okay, he's not 100% sure how these interactions are working. There's a chance that he might counter the wrong spell here, which will open up the window of opportunity for me.
Yeah, because even if you do play Show and Tell a lot, this might not be a matchup that you play that often. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So Brian definitely played for his outs here, and it looks like he might be able to pull this game out. I don't believe Ryan has any counter spells left. And yep, he's going to cast Chain of Vapor. He's going to flash back Chain of Vapors. He's going to target the Ley Line of Sanctity. Ryan is tapped out.
Got to read it again for the second time.
Well, he countered it the first time. And he's going to sack land to bounce to Caracas. I don't think it's, yeah, I think it's
a
non-land. So that one
He
would
can
matter.
bounce the Bob.
Yeah, he can bounce the Bob if he wants.
Unfortunately, those dice that represent the amount of mana that BBD has aren't actual targets for Chandelier.
So here we're going to start seeing some rituals get flashback. He can also cast Duress just to make sure the road's clear, which it obviously is. Now, he could probably, yeah, if he wants, he could just cast Tendrils right now. Yeah.
Yep.
There's Tendrils.
Oh my.
Wow. BBD, congratulations. Managed to pull out
Wow.
a seemingly impossible. We were literally talking about how Ryan's friends were just going to text him after he won the match.
He'll probably still get some text messages.
Wow. BBD pulls out an impossible match